So in the middle of writing a review of KCD2, which is shaping up to be, well...
When you want to string your lute and trumpet with your bag drum, who will pull a sheep gut out through the creature's rectum?
I decided to put that on pause and try out Avowed, Obsidian's brand new action-adventure game, and after about 30 hours of playtime and a full playthrough under my belt, I have to say... I'm disappointed. Let's break down why. I want to make it absolutely clear that I am not disappointed in this game because it's woke.
Fucking proud!
I'm not disappointed because Obsidian made one of my favorite games of all time and this just isn't comparable to it, or because arrows shot in the air don't fall back to the ground, or because they changed the color grading. I'm not even disappointed because the game is set in the Pillars of Eternity universe, because I haven't played those games yet, so I had zero expectations on that front. I am disappointed simply due to the fact that when I started the game, I had a ton of fun for about a dozen or so hours, just for that fun to evaporate extremely quickly and never return in the next 20 hours or so. Ignoring the fact that the introductory sequence, tutorial area, and first map did absolutely nothing to pull me into this world or make me care about anyone or anything, I only started getting slightly invested towards the end of the second area. At the time, that really didn't matter to me because the movement, combat, and sense of discovery all felt great. You start off the game and within literally a few minutes it's already teaching you the basics of destroying breakable objects, parkour, looting, killing the local wildlife, sword combat, dodging, shields and parries, light puzzle solving, skills, companions, magic, impactful choices that see you either saving a person or leaving them to rot in a jail cell, stealth, ranged combat with both guns and bows, all of it culminating with a decent boss fight that sees you using all of the skills you just learned against an enemy that has both a couple of melee and AoE attacks and even a gap closer or two. And I sat there and went, damn, if the game is willing to give me all of this build variety, all of these different mechanics, all topped with a pretty enjoyable tutorial boss fight, I can't wait to see what this game has in store further down the line. Needless to say, my expectations at this point were pretty high despite what I would consider to be a very lackluster story hook, and after boarding a ship and arriving at the tropical port city of Paradis, or Paradis, my expectations shot up even higher.
Captain of the local militia. We're a scrappy bunch, but we know our way around Paradis.
Straight off the bat, boom! The first thing I saw that really drew my attention was a pair of unique gloves that were being sold by genuinely the first merchant in the game. These would already give me a pretty significant stat boost if I had a slightly different build, and this was less than an hour into the game. And I went, damn, if the game is already giving me gloves like these so quickly into the game, I can't wait to see all of the other fun and unique pieces of gear in this game. Then you'll just be vibing, exploring the world, and chances are you'll hear the shimmering sound of loot nearby. You'll look around, it won't be anywhere in sight, only for you to slowly figure out that it's probably somewhere above you and you have to parkour to it, and all of a sudden your eyes redirect from the ground to the dozens of rooftops, balconies, cliffs and the like in search of creative parkour routes. There is so much loot scattered throughout this world that there is a basically 100% chance that if it looks like it should have loot, it does have it. You will learn that loot is scattered around most corners, in water, behind breakable environment, on random cliffs, behind waterfalls, it's basically everywhere. And you'll think to yourself, holy hell, I can't wait to explore every nook and cranny of this gorgeous world if it keeps rewarding my time and effort with so much loot. I am just bound to find a couple of interesting weapons sooner or later. Not only are there way more enemies to kill compared to the tutorial, but there are of course even new enemy types added. From people and spiders to giants and skeletons, all just begging you to try out different things and find your preferred playstyle. And while none of the enemies are all that mechanically deeper than the tutorial boss, most of them combine groups of melee warriors, casters, ranged units, and healers, which on top of your own abilities and the abilities of your companions, gives you a lot to keep track of and makes for a pretty enjoyable journey of learning which enemies to focus first and how to best deal with them. Every quest given to you is essentially just an excuse to send you to every corner of the map, throwing you back in this loop of explore, kill, loot, and I'd like to give a particular shout out to one specific quest in the first area of the game that sees you following in the footsteps of a lost group of explorers just for you to find a powerful being that is using the souls of its victims to try and power a goddamn giant robot statue. All of this is really great, and the opening few hours of this game really know how to hook you in. But unfortunately, it's also the best the game ever got for me. Underneath this crisp coat of shiny, colorful paint lies a heap of issues, mechanics that don't gel together at all, a lifeless world, and optimization issues that just ruin this game for me. And these issues start off with just really small things here and there, but grow bigger and bigger as your time with the game grows and you get more familiar with its systems. Upon your arrival to Paradis, you can talk to a merchant who quickly warns you of a different merchant and their wares, telling you not to buy anything from them. The merchant in question stands like 5 meters away from him, and when confronted about the issue, they answered that the first merchant would rather chase off their customers than admit that he was wrong. Now, I had just arrived from a conversation about how everyone in the city is a murderous thug, so in my head about a dozen questions came to mind. Why would he do that? What does he have against you? What is this all about? Wrong about what? Can you give more details, please? Should I be scared for my life? My character, on the other hand, somehow, some way, from just these lines of dialogue already knows that these two were not only married, but that they also went through a divorce. I don't know how, I don't know why, but yesterday you told me about that. These instances where characters know stuff they shouldn't yet, instances where there was no testing done from the developers to make sure that lines of dialogue are only played when the player actually sees what is being discussed about, are just prevalent enough for them to bother me. In this clip, Kai tells me that a journal must be relevant to a bunch of murals in a different room that we haven't even seen yet.
Maybe it has something to do with that wall painting in the other room. Let's check it out.
I felt the same feeling of annoyance and disappointment when I first realized just how hollow this world feels when it comes to the NPCs that litter it.
Yeah, exactly.
Come on!
Go into any town and you will see it filled with literally dozens of invincible, unkillable NPCs that don't react to anything, have nothing to say, and do nothing of value, just for you to then get to a single important NPC that will be filled to the brim with knowledge on how the city works, when it was built, what's going on, etc. I am not kidding when I say that these conversations, both with these important NPCs and your companions, can sometimes literally take longer than 45 minutes because the game doesn't spread this information throughout dozens of interesting scenarios or any of the dozens of the lifeless people roaming the streets, but instead just bombards you with all of this information at the same time. The cities you visit will have some underlying issue. Paradis, for example, is apparently this city of thieves and cutthroats that can't wait to shank you in a dark alley somewhere.
I killed a rat with my BAFTA.
Yet outside of a single quest, I would have never gotten that impression if not for my companions directly beating me over the head with said information. What's even worse is the fact that I have no idea what kind of tone this game is going for. On the one hand, Avowed is this tale of a god that is essentially trying to end the world as we know it, fighting back against their own imprisonment and torture, with genuinely complex motivations being given from like 10 different sides of the argument. Yet when Giada finally reaches something resembling a conclusion to her arc, and she ragefully demands another question of the god that killed her parents, going on a tirade of how unfair this is, trying to understand why, how, for what reason all of this happened, Kai breaks the tension of this important scene and completely ruins the moment by saying,
That's 4 questions.
in this essentially apocalyptic story, your companions will literally look directly into the camera just to make a Marvel movie tier joke, and it took me out of the experience every single time it happened.
Oh, and what do you use for fertilizer? Other corpses?
You don't waste time, do you?
Dreamful spiders.
Gods, regular giant spiders are deadly enough. Don't stay here too long. You're gonna need those friends of yours.
Relax, Daron. The only strange dreams we've had involve your mother.
Speaking of infuriating, I think the game looks great. Not only do I not mind the color palette, character design, nor the art style one bit, but there are also just so many moments of genuine beauty scattered throughout the game. From tropical paradises to fungal-infested woods, deserts, mystical caves, and giant magical gardens, this game is a feast for the eyes from beginning to end. So it would be a shame if it constantly stuttered and couldn't handle 60 FPS at 1080p with every setting turned to low, ray tracing turned off, and DLSS active on system specs that are about as good as the developer's recommended system requirements. Listen, I don't get what the problem is with Unreal Engine 5, I don't get why there are basically 0 optimized games on this engine. The optimization is dogshit, the game drops frames, stutters, and occasionally even crashes whenever it feels like. Nope, hold on, I have a crash report. The UE Alabama game has... Alabama? There are also just a lot of weird quality of life things in this game that, while incredibly small and usually insignificant, stack up on what I just said and even a few things I haven't talked about yet that just make the overall experience that much more clunky. You can come up to a bunch of food that's laying there in the open world and hold a button to eat it. However, when you are looting enemy corpses, you can't eat the food outright. You have to put it in your inventory and then go searching for it and eat it out of your inventory, and I don't understand why. A similar situation goes for lockpicking. If you're not going to give me a minigame whenever I lockpick a chest, why make me hold down a button for 3 seconds when you could just tell me to press one button and do that instantly? The parkour is great fun even if it feels a bit arcadey for my liking, but it is so blatantly obvious that the only places you can grab are these boring, predetermined locations that aren't meant as scenery. Meanwhile, try to jump on a knee-high table or get yourself unstuck from a weird corner because some things have collision, some don't, and it's an absolute crapshoot for you to know which one's which. And despite there being an easy solution for your character to climb over, it just refuses to do so, making you essentially stuck unless you get lucky or teleport out of that situation. I haven't yet talked about the upgrade system, and I will in literally 45 seconds, but for most of the game's runtime, gold is completely useless. I stockpiled it for the longest time until I just went, fuck it, it's useless, I don't need it for anything, I'm just going to buy upgrade materials and health potions and stuff. Because despite there being a crafting system, I can't even craft a fucking potion in this game, but whatever. Just for the last tier of upgrades that you get to when the enemies get the most difficult and annoying, when there is the highest number of enemies on the screen, when I had the most frustration with the game, to all of a sudden require gold for upgrades. Trust me, there are more issues, like attacks not going through your companions, so good luck hitting anything if you decide to summon a giant spectral bear. But I want to make it clear that if these were my only issues with the game, I still would have enjoyed it. I am primarily a gameplay first type of gamer, and if the only issues I had with this game were shitty optimization, a few quality of life missteps, dialogue which ranges from cringe-inducing to genuinely interesting and thought-provoking that I can skip whenever I want with the press of a single button, and a lifeless world, I would unironically sing the praises of this game because the combat and exploration still feel great. For about 8 hours. You know all of those statements I made earlier? Statements like, I can't wait to explore every part of this world, and I can't wait to see the variety in gameplay, and blah blah blah? Well, what if I told you that every single piece of equipment you get in this game that isn't a grimoire is as bland as giving you a boost to your stats or dealing fire damage or cold damage or lightning damage? So there is basically no versatility in the half a dozen or so different weapons the game provides. The only difference between a sword and a different sword is what type of damage it deals and how much damage it deals. And the only difference between a sword and a dagger is how quickly you have to press left mouse button in order to attack. And even in those rare instances where the game gives you a fun ability, like the ability on my musket that bounced a bullet to 2 additional targets, the game couldn't even make that fun because the second and third enemy the bullet hits take almost no damage from it. They managed to make even the conceptually fun abilities feel boring and unsatisfying in practice. What if I told you that every loot container contains nothing but food, upgrade materials, and equipment that you will either sell at a merchant or disassemble in order to get more upgrade materials, with which you will upgrade your weapons? What if I told you that upgrading your weapons gives you literally nothing but a minute stat increase, but that the way enemy scaling works, it compares your weapon level to the enemy's level, so you need to have your weapons at the highest tier possible at all times if you don't want enemies to outscale you, which basically forces you into doing most of the side quests and exploring most of the map, even if you don't want to? This, by the way, has the added drawback of making it so you really can't try out different weapons, because even with only 3 weapons on me and 1 piece of armor, I was constantly on the back foot when it came to keeping them upgraded enough for the zone I was exploring. What if I told you that the quest with the powerful being that I mentioned earlier is one of a rare few quests with any real depth, and over 90% of this game's quests are boring fetch quests and bounties that repeat over and over and over and over again? The vast majority of enemies and bosses are incredibly basic, with only a few additional moves when compared to the tutorial boss. So instead of there being any big climactic fights that test your skills, the game from beginning to end just spams you with dozens of enemies in the hopes that they overwhelm you, which leads to almost 0 memorable encounters. What's the point in rewarding exploration by giving you pieces of a totem that buffs you and scattering 4 of those totems over 4 maps if you can only have 1 of these active at once, and the only thing these totems give you anyway are just the most useless, situational and boring stat increases and modifiers? I swear you could literally have all 4 of these active at the same time, and even then you'd barely notice the difference. The enemy variety is so low that after exploring the first map you will basically see most of the enemies that the game has to offer, to the point that the game will be so starved of enemies to throw at you that you'll be fighting the same bear you fought in a tropical forest 15 hours later in the goddamn desert. I guess the too long don't give a fuck version of this entire video can simply be boiled down to Avowed just isn't a game for me. I prefer games that challenge me or make me feel like I'm part of a living, breathing world where I actually have to learn something more than just left-clicking really fast at an enemy until it dies, or spamming as many damaging AoE and CC spells and then left-clicking enemies until they die. And unless you're the type of person who either doesn't have the time to sink your teeth into a game, or really dislikes deep, complex games that challenge you in any way, and just likes games that are more repetitive and easier to get into, you won't find much here. Even if it cut off all the unnecessary fat and was priced at a more reasonable $40 or so, Avowed would still be a hodgepodge of ideas that just don't gel. The exploration is fun, moving through vertically inclined areas feels great, and many places in the world are masterfully built with that in mind, but the rewards for exploration are shallow and boring, serving as merely items to sell or break down for crafting materials. The combat, and especially the magic side of it, feels awesome. Enemies react and stagger to your hits, you can whirlwind them into the air, send them flying off cliffs, all while summoning a lightning storm and a bear companion to help you in combat. Trying to make a build where everything in your arsenal gels together is one of the best parts of the game. Yet none of the weapons feel unique from one another, and the upgrade system for your weapons is so stingy that it completely disincentivizes the players from experimenting, which leads to a combat system that gets pretty boring way before the halfway mark of the game. This isn't even mentioning the lacking enemy and quest variety, nor the fact that literally every single enemy in the game is incredibly basic with only a few moves, so the only way the game tries to keep you engaged is by constantly spamming you with hordes of forgettable enemies that repeat over and over again. The story and companions flip-flop between dark and deep themes of loss, regret, sacrifice, free will, etc., and Marvel movie levels of humor, which makes for one of the weirdest tones I have ever experienced in a game. I really believe that the game looks gorgeous, yet the optimization is horrendous, with stutters and FPS drops happening at 1080p low settings, ray tracing off and DLSS on a PC that should have no quarrels running this game at a constant 60 FPS. With the added downside of this being a game priced at $70, when at best it should realistically cost like $40, and all of this leads to a game that, while not terrible in any regard, is just downright forgettable and disappointing. 4 out of 10.